Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ, the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to look at the 2024 toss-up states. So the 2020 election map saw a lot of the typical swing states not be swing states, and a lot of Republican-leaning states become more in play. When Texas and Georgia come to mind. So first, we're going to take a look at this map and kind of rule out which states are really going to be realistically competitive and which aren't. And we'll start off west-east, starting with the state of Nevada. So the state of Nevada in the 2020 election actually trended slightly more Republican than it did in the 2020 election. So right off the bat, that makes it somewhat of an interesting case. Biden broke 50% of the vote barely, but he only got 50.1%. In comparison to Obama's reelection, which was more of a redder year for a state like Nevada, Obama was still able to get 52.3% of the vote. Donald Trump had the highest percentage of the vote of any Republican since George W. Bush in 2004 when he won the state. So the state of Nevada actually has continued to trend more Republican as time goes on. Ever since 2008, the state has been getting redder. So I think right off the bat, that makes it more competitive, especially since Donald Trump was not that popular in the state of Nevada. He still made the state very competitive, and I don't really think they did a whole lot of campaigning there during the general anyways. So that being said, we're going to definitely put that as a toss-up right off the bat. Arizona, same thing. We're going to put that immediately as a toss-up state. Arizona flipped to the Democrats for the first time since 1996. And, it was a slim victory at that. Biden only winning by 0.3% exactly. So this was a razor thin margin compared to, let's say, the Senate race in the state, which was actually a lot more Democratic. And there's a number of reasons for that. You could look at Martha McSally as a candidate, Mark Kelly as a stronger candidate. There's a number of reasons for that, but we're not really going to focus on Senate races during this election. Again, if we look at 2016, Arizona went to Donald Trump by 3.5, 3.4, 3.5, something like that. And of course, the areas he did really well were, of course, the population centers. He was able to hold on to Maricopa County, which is home to Phoenix. Interestingly enough, he actually got a higher percentage in Maricopa, 48.1, than he did last time around. So even though he ended up winning the state, it seems like his performance could have been much stronger. Third parties probably played a factor in that, but also probably his unpopularity as a candidate in a state like Arizona, where somewhere in the Rust Belt, Donald Trump would be more preferable. So automatically, this is going to be a state in contention. Alaska, I don't really see as a toss-up. I'd put it right now as likely Republican. The only reason we're even talking about it was because the margin that Trump won the state of Alaska was only 10 points. So it wasn't really a particularly large margin. I am curious, though. Alaska actually does have ranked choice voting now. I don't know if that works for the presidential level, because I know Maine never had to deal with that since Joe Biden got over 50%. But I wonder in Alaska if that's the case as well, because we could very well see a ranked choice scenario if a Republican were to get below 50, which I think, for the record, is very, very unlikely, especially since Democrats are unlikely to put any real effort in the state of Alaska. If they need Senate seats, they'll try and make DC a state or something like that, or, try and fail most likely. But I don't really think a lot of effort is going to be put in the state of Alaska this time around. So I think automatically Republicans are going to have the edge there. Colorado and New Mexico are not going to be safe states. I'm just going to put them as, we'll put Colorado as safe. We'll put New Mexico as likely. These are not going to be toss-up states, I meant to say. Both states went decisively for President Biden. Colorado went to Joe Biden by a safe margin, over 13 points. In comparison, in 2016, the state only went to Hillary Clinton by, I think, around 4.9 or something. So Colorado is no longer a toss-up state, swing state. It is decisively Democratic. The Democratic margins in the suburbs and Denver are just too massive for the rural parts of the state to overcome. Even as places like Pueblo have gotten redder, it doesn't really make a difference because the Denver metro area, Boulder, Fort Collins, this entire region of the state is so Democratic now, it doesn't matter, given the population center. I would honestly say Colorado is probably a safe Democratic state at this point, given Biden's performance there. And also Trump's low performance in the state. He only got 41.9%. Even when McCain lost the state in 08, I think he got 44%. New Mexico is probably going to be a similar story. I think it's going to be a likely state. I don't really see a lot of changes happening in New Mexico because we saw some shifts in the rural areas, the urban areas, but they seem to sort of even out. The margin wasn't anything too crazy. On election night and a few days after, it actually seemed like New Mexico was redder than it was. I think Trump had 44, and some parts of the night he had 45%, which I thought was really interesting. Of course, that turned out to, as the rest of the votes rolled in, that turned out not to be the case. But I think New Mexico is going to be a state that is likely, again, not really a lot of attention is going to be paid to it. It's a state with only 5 electoral votes. Same with Alaska, only 3. There people are going to be focusing on the big states, both parties. Texas is definitely, I think, a state that is going to be a toss-up. That, in the sense, right now, we won't really know who exactly is favored. Obviously, Republicans are expected to be favored, but given Texas' massive demographic changes, massive shifts to the left, I think the only thing that really saved the state of Texas for the Republicans is the Rio Grande Valley and how drastically these counties trended Republican. That's the only thing that kept this state from really teetering on the edge. This state was won by Donald Trump by over 5 points. That being said, of course, this state, if we look at 2016, went to Donald Trump by 9 points exactly. Trump actually lost ground in the state. It was Biden who gained on Hillary Clinton's lead. So these, again, massive shifts in the suburbs of Dallas. If we look, Denton County, 53-45. The margin in 2016 was 57-37. These are drastic shifts as Texas gets more out-of-state migration, more migration from other countries in general. It's going to get closer, and unless Republicans can do better Latino outreach, this state will be gone probably before the end of the decade. But I definitely think it's going to be a toss-up in the state in the sense that I think it is going to have a lot more attention paid to it, particularly for Democrats. If they were smart, they would put money, time, and investment into the state. Not as much as they would, say, Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan or something like that, but they definitely should keep an eye on the state because demographically, the state is only favoring them as time goes on, unless there's a change in voting patterns. I think Nebraska's second will probably remain a toss-up. It went pretty decisively for President Biden, 52-47, around 7 points, 6 points or so. But Don Bacon also won this congressional district, and Ben Sasse also won it. So it seems like Republicans in general remain favored, actually, in the second district overall. But I think presidentially it's going to be one of the toss-ups as of right now. A state like Minnesota, I would say for now could be a toss-up. Now this, of course, is stretching it. I'm being generous because, the state of Minnesota ended up going to President Biden pretty considerably, 7.1%. That's a far cry from where Hillary Clinton was, barely eking it out in the state at 1.5%. And that is in thanks in part to the Minneapolis metro area. The Minneapolis area trended heavily Democratic, and that offset Republican gains in the Iron Range and the northern part of the state. Although some of these areas still trended blue, actually, which is surprising because a lot of mayors up in the Iron Range were actually endorsing Trump. I thought that would play more of a factor, but I guess it wasn't as big of a factor as I thought it would be when I was predicting the state of Minnesota. Minnesota, I actually predicted would go to Biden by around 5, so I underestimated his support in this state. I mean, Minnesota is a state that hasn't gone for a Republican since 1972. It has the longest streak of any state, Democratic state, I should say, of voting blue. So right now I would say it's a toss-up. By the way, to emphasize, toss-up does not mean the margin is going to be within 2 points. I just think these are states that could go either way right now. And again, I'm being generous with putting Minnesota in the column because it's probably going to go blue, but I figured I'd put it on here. The state of Iowa, I think, is definitely a likely Republican state. And the reason I think Iowa is more out of contention than a state like Minnesota is because it went more decisively in favor uh, of the Republicans, of Donald Trump. It went to Trump by about 8 points. And this is similar to the margin it went to Donald Trump last time, around 9 points. So, yeah, it got narrower, but it's really not that significant. Minnesota, however, I do think is more of a toss up because overall, if you look at the popular vote for the House seats in the state of Minnesota, it's been getting closer, and that's something I do take into consideration. I think the Rust Belt as a whole is going to trend more Republican if we just look at demographics. White voters snapped back more Democratic than they usually do for President Biden. I think that is going to change in the future because the long term trends of this region are actually in favor of Republicans, just demographically speaking. I don't think these states are ever going to be solid Republican states by any stretch, although they could be in 20 years. I don't really know. But I would say that they're always going to be competitive states. And I think Minnesota, while Democrats do have a pretty sizable advantage, I think it will remain somewhat competitive. If we look at Wisconsin, of course, Michigan and PA, we don't even have to talk about those. Those are going to be toss-ups for sure in the 2024. If we just look at the margins they went to Joe Biden by, they were pretty narrow. Michigan was the most decisive, but Wisconsin was by 0.6%. Pennsylvania was 1.2%. These are very narrow margins. So I think this definitely indicates that these states are going to be pretty competitive. Um, Ohio, I think, is definitely going to be a state that is favoring Republicans. I think it's likely at this point. I think, and again with the toss-ups, I also include lean states in there as well. So a state like Minnesota, Michigan, which are lean blue. But I think the state of Ohio is not really going to be a toss-up in 24. I don't think it's going to get a lot of attention either because it really doesn't need to. This is a state that Republicans have continued to do well in. In 2016, they won the state by around 8 points. In 2020, they won the state by around 8 points. So I think that's going to continue going forward. I think they're going to remain pretty strong there. As for toss-up states, I think Maine is probably going to stay a likely state. I think Maine's second is going to be more of a toss-up district. New Hampshire, likewise, I think will be a toss-up as well. It's a state that went pretty decisively for Joe Biden compared to previous elections, around 7 points, similar to Minnesota. But again, this is a state that on the state level is very competitive, and even on the federal level too, depending on the candidates. I just think 2020 was not Trump's year. I think had COVID not happened, had we not had the protests over the summer back in May, it probably would have been closer. I still think Joe Biden would have won the state, probably right around 3 or 4, considering Trump was very unpopular. However, just as a general rule, New Hampshire tends to be a swing state for a reason. The state government went totally Republican the same year that Jeanne Shaheen won her reelection to the Senate, as well as Chris Sununu as governor by landslides, both of them. So this is a very odd state. It's one of those New England states, but it's going to stay a toss-up for sure. Virginia, I think, will be safe blue. I just wanted to kind of talk about it because it was a state that was formally a swing state. But if we just look at the margins, Joe Biden won by 10.1%. That's not really a swing statey margin. And the areas that have trended blue are continuing to trend blue. Former Republican strongholds in Virginia, like Virginia Beach, have now flipped blue. Stafford County used to be a Republican county, is now a lean blue county, or at least a toss-up at best. So there's a lot of areas in the state that just keep trending away from Republicans. Chesterfield County was formerly Republican too. If we just look at 2016 and we kind of compare side by sides, really. James City County, Republican county, Chesapeake, etc. So many counties flipped back to the Democrats, and the state has just continued to trend more and more Democratic. And I think it's going to be a lot more like its neighbor Maryland in the future, in the sense that You're going to have very red rural areas, here on the east and western side. But the urban center is going to be solidly Democratic. So that's going to be a solid blue state in 24, most likely. North Carolina, I think, will be a toss-up. I don't think that's a surprise. The margin came down to less than a point and a half this time around. Trump only won the state by 1.3. If we go back to 2016, Donald Trump won the state of North Carolina by almost 4 points, around 3.6, which is pretty good, I guess, for a swing state. But North Carolina in particular is going to continue to be competitive, definitely. It's a state that continuously votes to the right of the nation, and that designation will probably continue. So that's definitely going to be a toss-up state. South Carolina, I think, is going to be likely red. It did trend a little bit more Democratic this time around, but it's still technically, by my specifications, of a safe state of 12 points. I think the margin was 11.6. So it doesn't actually fit that bill, but it is almost safe just because this is a state that tends to get in the low double digits, but always tends to stay in that range. If places like Charleston continue to trend more Democratic, if places like Greenville, which is a very Republican area, if these places tend to trend more Democrat, or if we get into the single digits in 24, then it definitely will be closer to moving into that toss-up category. But I think for right now, Republicans have the edge. Of course, Georgia is going to be a toss-up this time around. If we look at the results from 2020, Joe Biden won the state only right around 0.23%, which is a very, very narrow margin. But if you look at the way Georgia has trended, we went from Donald Trump winning the state by 5.1 to him losing the state by 0.2. That's a pretty remarkable shift in only 4 years, and that's large in part to massive voter registration efforts in the Atlanta metro area to register black voters, white suburbanites, etc. And that has really paid off because the state has gone heavily in the leftward direction recently. Finally, the state of Florida is a Republican state. I don't know if I want to put it as a toss-up or a lean because I think leans will be considered. I think just for now, we'll put it as a toss-up, although I'd like to stress that Minnesota is also a toss-up and favors Democrats. This is going to be a state that favors Republicans, so I just want to put that out there before people attack me for putting Florida as a toss-up. Republicans clearly have the edge in the state. If we look at the 2020 results, Donald Trump won the state by 3.3%. He won it pretty handedly compared to last time, only winning it by a little bit over a point. And again, the places he really did well were actually the urban areas. Miami-Dade, Broward County, he did better. Places he actually lost ground were traditional Republican areas: Duval County, Nassau County, these areas in the Northeast. And that's large in part due to the Latino vote trending a lot more Republican in the 2020 cycle, which put Florida kind of in the lean column at this point, which is where I would put it now. But if we're going to make toss-ups also lean states, then I'm definitely going to put it in this category. So anyway, guys, that's all for today's video. This is just kind of a premature toss-ups map for the 2024 election. If polling or otherwise indicates, I'm sure I'll make a follow-up video in the future editing this. But for right now, these seem to be the battleground toss-up states for 2024. Not too much different from 2020, although Texas I have put on the map since its trends are trending more in that direction. It was before a likely Republican state. It's only gone to Donald Trump by around 5. That could bounce back, and we'll see. But for right now, I think it's going to be a toss-up state in the sense that I can't say for certainty which way these states are going to go if we do have a massive blue wave year in 24, which I think is unlikely, but there's always a possibility. Then it's possibly a state that could flip, but that's, nearly impossible at this point in time. But anyway, guys, thank you for watching this video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.